Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to cover with you some factors you should consider when you're looking at setting up your business internationally, relocating it, etc. I've been having some conversations with clients about, where they should set up their companies, how to structure. Typically tax is one of the factors, but I want to cover for you a broad range of considerations that might go into it. So as a result, maybe you end up deciding, hey, listen, maybe a little bit of tax is actually better than no tax, or vice versa. Maybe you can get it all together in one package. But we're going to cover that coming up. I'm going to give you some of the examples of places that might be really good for you from the standpoint of a few of these things. So we'll cover that. I'm going to take into account things like banking. We're going to take just lots of pieces that are really relevant on a practical level to your business, way outside of just the scope of okay, what is the tax or the regulations, etc. So I'm going to cover those. I'll give you some of the places that are maybe worth looking at that you maybe haven't thought of, some that maybe you have thought of. And so let's get started. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Really appreciate any subscriptions that you do. We value that a lot. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, please tell us in the comments below. And if you're at all interested in help with international structuring, paying the lowest legal amount of tax possible, either for your business or for yourself personally, how to orchestrate your affairs, whether you're going to be staying somewhere or relocating, and if you're relocating, where to, how to get the residencies, how to get special tax treatment, getting international second passports, setting up companies, banking, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer. There's a link below, or check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, let's dive into it. So obviously, when we're looking at where to structure, we're going to look at taxes, right? This is one of the things we talk a lot about on this channel. And so I want to kind of draw your attention to a few different pieces of this. The one is, okay, what's the sticker tax rate, right? That's kind of the first thing that people go to. And I remember when I first got into this business, when I started learning about international structuring, etc., I was a little bit blinded by that sticker. So I'd see something like, for instance, Singapore and say, oh, look, it's got a 17% tax rate. Well, that's not so low, But what I think you need to dive into deeper is things like, hey, do they have a participation exemption? Meaning, can you receive dividends from another subsidiary company tax-free? Likewise, what are the withholding taxes? Do you have an opportunity to pay them out accordingly? So I'll give you an example of that. UK is actually a really good holding company jurisdiction because you can receive dividends tax-free and you can pay them out tax-free. Canada, you can receive dividends tax-free, but you can't pay them out tax-free. So, it gives you some contrast. You've got some places where you can't receive them tax-free and you can't pay them out tax-free. So, you have a spectrum there of factors to look at. In addition to that, you should really be paying attention to, as we've discussed before, the residency rules of companies there. Sometimes that's something you can take advantage of, whether there's kind of capital gains rates. In some cases, maybe you have some special tax regimes. You might have free zones, you might have IP box regimes. So there's some complexity around the tax that might help you be able to optimize aside from your headline rate. I'll give you an example of this. In Georgia, the headline tax rate you would typically pay is 15%, but you can get something called a virtual zone company where for certain types of business, you can end up paying 5%. They have a new regime there now called international companies or international trade company, I think it is, that also has a favorable rate. You have something similar in Iceland. They have a special international trade company, which you can get 5% on. Georgia has also a free zone company where you can pay no tax, although it's very difficult to bank with it. But anyway, so that's the thing that I want to pay attention to here is, hey, listen, with any of these countries, sometimes there are special regimes. Sometimes there's a low tax entry point for small businesses. For example, in Canada, right, up to $500,000 in most provinces, you can end up paying a substantially lower amount of tax. I've mentioned in other videos, in Romania, you can pay 1% to 3% tax on the gross, so that can sometimes be useful. Poland has a 9% lower tax. Even when we look at something like Singapore has a lower rate for the first 300,000 or so dollars. Same thing with Hong Kong. So depending on who you are, it may not be so straightforward as just the headline rate. Okay, so that's number one, paying attention to tax. Number two, another one that I talk a lot about on this channel is banking, right? So it may be great that somebody says, hey, listen, I have a BVI company, wonderful, but can you get a bank account for that BVI company? Very, very difficult in many situations. And even if you can get a bank account, you may have a problem where if that account gets shut down, there's nowhere to move it to. And then you're in really big trouble because your money could be trapped, right? So that's not good. One of the reasons why we always recommend having at least 2 bank accounts. Okay, so pay attention to what can you get for banking. Is there local banking options? That's usually more stable, usually going to give you a situation that you can be a little bit more workable with, etc. Now, spinning off of just banking itself is what about credit facilities, right? Is there some credit facility benefit you can get there? So I was talking to somebody recently who reached out to me. They were doing some investing and they wanted to say, hey, listen, how can they build credit in countries like the US, UK, etc.? So that's a factor that is worth considering. Third is payment processing, okay? So if you have payment processing attached to your company, right, that's kind of related to the financial services. And this might include PayPal, this might include Stripe. Sometimes if you're, say, wanting to use Shopify or something, there's only so many payment gateways that they support. If you're using something like ClickFunnels, they don't support a lot of payment gateways. So which payment gateways you can use with which software could make a big difference in this type of situation, okay? So that's something else worth noting. Beyond that is what about how you're going to pay your employees, pay your bills, etc. So sometimes you can get payroll cards and expense cards and things like this that can make it much easier. That might also affect people who are doing, say, online advertising. They're affiliate marketers. They need to fund different campaigns. They need a lot of cards. Okay, that's something that you can get in some parts of the world, but not in other parts of the world. Okay, fair enough. Moving on. What about in terms of regulations? Okay, so I see this quite a bit with people who are in things like the gaming industry. Obviously, the adult industry would be another one. Various different health products. Sometimes you have different supplements, etc., that you end up with some regulations on. Obviously, stuff like CBD gets considerations on the regulatory side. But just depending on the industry that you're in, that could play a pretty big role. Okay, so something else to be aware of as you're going about this. Next one, after those regulations, is staff. Okay, so staff is a big one that I try and put quite a bit of emphasis on, because if you're going to grow past, yourself, then you're going to want to hire people. Now, you can of course hire people remotely. There's tons of sites. There's Upwork. There's, Fiverr. There's, a bunch, jobs.ph, et cetera. My wife helps people hire people in Serbia. And so, there's lots of different things that you can do to hire people. However, it may be that you want to have people locally. There could be a payoff of that for some reason. And how you end up paying those people, if you're dealing with them locally, sometimes you can get better deals. Sometimes you get access to a different job market. Generally speaking, I find people, say, on Upwork tend to be more expensive. So that's something to consider and, has a related piece to it. So what does this play into? There's a couple different pieces. One is, what is your availability of talent, right? So for instance, maybe you're in Bulgaria and you're saying, hey, listen, Bulgaria, great, I can, get skilled people at, reasonable prices, fantastic, good job market. But there's just not an abundance of people. It's a small country. There's only, 5 million people or so in the country, 5 or 6 million. And so as a result, if you're wanting to hire very specialized people in some sort of a coding field, you may find yourself struggling to find talent. You might be better off going to Romania. You might be better off going to Ukraine. You might be better off going to Russia, places like that, right? So this is one of the problems that I have with Georgia. I've mentioned before, I think Georgia is really good for doing business in a bunch of regards. They have a nice tax regime. Their banking used to be fantastic, kind of less so now. But it's a pretty small talent pool. So be aware of that. Obviously, another part to it is language, right? Can you find people who speak the language that you need? That's a relevant issue. Then oftentimes, even if you are finding people in that language, you're going to pay a premium. So for instance, if you can go and hire somebody in Ukraine who speaks Ukrainian, you're going to pay a dramatically lower rate than if you're hiring an English speaker in Ukraine. So that's a consideration. The third part related to those people is, what about the socials, right? You could be in a situation, this is one of the reasons I advocate, say, with Romania. Okay, so Romania, if I compare Bulgaria to Romania, okay, similar wages depending on what's going on, or you might compare Romania to Serbia, right? What happens? Well, the socials in Serbia are super high. They're like more reasonable in Bulgaria, and there's no employer side socials in Romania. So your actual cost as an employer might be lower, right? So that, I mean, you're talking about 20+% in some cases, right? That can make a pretty big difference. So be aware of that factor. What's another factor that you might pay attention to is the labor laws, right? So for instance, there's kind of a joke, which isn't so funny, which is that in Netherlands, it's pretty much impossible to fire people. Well, that's not really such a great place to employ people then, is it? You know, so keep those factors all in mind when you're looking at this. Those would be kind of some of the main considerations I would have. So just kind of to recap for you as you're going through this, you might say, all right, I have taxes, right? I have regulations, I have financial infrastructure, and I have the pieces related to talent and people. I guess if you were to throw something in there, you could throw in reputation, right? And you could also throw in kind of access to the local market infrastructure. And I think infrastructure is probably worth also mentioning in this regard. So for instance, if you look at the Caribbean countries, one of the reasons why I really dislike having companies in the Caribbean is because of the fact that you have hurricane season comes through there, right? So imagine if your business is, you know, dependent, Puerto Rico is a classic example of this, right? Every few years it seems like there's a hurricane that comes in, shuts the whole island down for a period of time. Well, can your business afford to be shut down for a month or two? There's no power and people are off work and things like this. That doesn't sound so great. So as a result, you know, the geography can play a role. So anyway, I hope those things help. If you're at all interested, you probably have some other factors that you can think of that aren't immediately coming to my mind. Put them definitely in the link below. I guess on the infrastructure, I could have mentioned, for instance, you know, speed of internet. That could certainly play a role. Cost and access of phones. Disadvantage of UAE, you don't have access to VoIP. You have to use VPNs to get around it, etc. So all these things could be factors for you. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you want any help with this sort of thing, please reach out to me. Again, you can book a call, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer, link below, or check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. And remember to smash the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. We really appreciate your support. Share the video if you liked it. Like it also. And if you didn't, please tell us in the comments why. We'd love to have your feedback. I will see you guys on the next video.